class 10. Let us continue with our revision of the lesson chapter 3, that is the resistance and rebellion lesson. So far we have revised the Santhal rebellion, Munda rebellion, then Coal rebellion, and why did the tribals revolt against the landlords and the moneylenders as well as the British colonial rule. Proceeding with the syllabus, let us discuss about some more rebellions. The first one which I would like to revise is the Rangpur Rebellion, which had occurred in the year 1783 in the region of Rangpur and Dinajpur against the Ijaradar Debi Singh. The peasants over there, they had revolted against the Ijaradar Debi Singh. Who was the Ijaradar? Ijaradar was the person who was given the control of collecting the taxes of a cluster of villages for a certain period of time. So Debi Singh, who happened to be the Ijaradar or in charge of the tax collector of the districts of Dinajpur and Rangpur, he was very much atrocious in nature, and if the tenants failed to pay the land revenue, he used to send his soldiers or the his officials to torture them, the peasants, the poor peasants, burn their houses, forcibly take away their land and all. So the peasants over there, they revolted against Debi Singh, against the high taxation and the tortures of Debi Singh. The leaders were Sheikh Nuruluddin and Drijanarayan, and they had set up an independent government also, which aimed for a united Hindu-Muslim protest against Debi Singh. Next we move on to Bhil rebellion. Bhils are the tribes of the Western Ghat, which is basically lying in the state of Maharashtra. So there the Bhils also revolted against the British colonial rule for the high imposition of high taxes, and their leaders were Chil Nayak, Hiriya. They were the leaders, and their revolt had begun in the year 1819, but it had lasted a very long time. It lasted till about 1846. And next we move on to the Sannyasi Fakhiri revolt. Sannyasi Fakhiri revolt, it was the revolt of the monks and hermits who had in course of time turned into the peasants. Now it was basically a peasant revolt. It took place in the East Bengal and North Bengal area, and the sannyasis, fakirs, they were supported by the poor peasants, the workers, the landless zamindars, jobless soldiers, workers in the sense the artisans, so those who were the who were engaged in handicraft industries. So leaders of the sannyasis were Bhavani Pathak and Devi Chaudhurani, and leaders of the fakir were Musa Shah, Majnu Shah. They were the leaders of fakirs. Now introduction, they had turned into the farming. They were farming in the no tax land, and suddenly the introduction of the permanent settlement forced them to pay the tax on their cultivable land. Then they were imposed with the pilgrimage tax also, and the British government had put a ban on their free movement. Remember, during that time, there were no roads. People had to go from one place to another, passing through dense forests, and forests consisted of dacoits, bandits and dacoits. They used to loot the travelers. So these sannyasis and fakirs, though they were very poor, but still they carried with themselves the lathis and the knives and the weapons like that, in order to keep themselves safe while traveling through the forest. And they also used to keep the bed, used to tie the turban on their head. And the British found that these people were dangerous to their officials. Like they were carrying the weapons, so they were going to inflict attacks on the British officials. So that is why the British had put a ban on their free movement. So all these causes, the permanent settlement, then the ban on free movement, and then imposition of pilgrimage tax. Also, if they found them defying the British officials, the British officials used to inflict tortures on the sannyasis and fakirs. So the sannyasis and fakirs, under the leadership of Bhavani Pathak Devi Chaudhurani and Musa Shah, Majnu Shah, etc., burst into revolt in the year 1772, which had lasted for about 40 years, till 1812. And it was basically a peasant revolt, and not influenced by any religion, though they were the hermits or the monk section, but they were not at all involved in any kind of religious activities while inflicting the protest. So both the Hindus and Muslim peasants had joined the sannyasis and fakirs, and they used the guerrilla tactics of warfare. That means sudden attack. And basically the result was a failure because of the internal conflicts among the leaders, no organization, proper organization, lack of firearms and definite aims, etc. Now the best example you will get about this Sannyasi Fakir revolt, a very good glimpse of this Sannyasi Fakir revolt you will be getting through Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's Anandamot and his novel Devi Chaudhurani. So these two books tell us about the Sannyasi Fakir revolt. And next we move on to peasant rebellion, but which had started as religious reform movement. Two movements have started as the religious reform movement, but ultimately they had turned themselves into socio-religious and political and economic movement. So one of them was Wahhabi movement. Now Wahhabi means regeneration or rebirth. Now rebirth of what? Rebirth of the principles of Islam. In the land of Arabia, it was realized that the principles of Islam and the writings of Quran, the injunctions of Quran had become complicated and full of impurities. So there was a movement started in the land of Arabia by a person called Abdul Wahhab to purify the principles of Islam and to abide by the injunctions of the holy book Quran. So in India, Syed Ahmad of Raebareli in UP had started this Wahhabi movement, and it had begun, as I have said, that it had begun as a religious reform movement, but it turned into socio-political and economic movement. But the thing is that the Wahhabi movement had it had a communal character. That means mostly the Muslim peasants were involved in this movement. Though some Hindu, because they because it fought for the religious superstitions, so poor Hindu peasants have also joined it, but mostly it was fought by the Muslim peasants. And so the movement had a communal touch, and the Wahhabis called the British occupied land as Dar ul Harb. That means the land of enemies, and they aimed at turning this land of enemy into land of Islam, or Darul Islam, or land of God. So basically it was an anti-British movement. So historians tell that this had a nationalist character, and the movement was unsuccessful because the British had repressed the movement, and the Wahhabis had fought the last battle with the Sikhs in 1831 in the Battle of Balakot, and they have lost the battle and their movement ultimately ended. Now in Bengal, the Wahhabi movement was brought up by a person called Titu Mir. Now Titu Mir, his real name was Mir Nisar Ali. He was an inhabitant of Barasat district, and he had visited the land of Arabia, was influenced by the Wahhabi movement, and he came back and he took upon the principles of Wahhabi movement in Bengal, and he declared the Zamindars and the British as the enemies of the land, and asked the peasants not to pay the tax to them. He built a bamboo fortress, or Basher Kella, in the village of Narkelberia in Barasat district, and declared himself as Badshah, and started collecting tax from the local landlords and the peasants, local peasants. Many poor peasants had become his followers, and together they started to rule that area. The British and the landlords, they were very much distressed by this development, and the British had sent a large force to subdue Titu Mir's movement over there, and so Titu Mir's army had fought very bravely with the British army, but ultimately they lost and were killed in the battle. The bamboo fortress was put into fire. So this was it. Next day we will be carrying on with the other revolts that had taken place against the British government.